Thanks for joining us. Now we begin by taking you to the Labadi Beach Hotel, where the Africa Oil Summit is currently ongoing. It's a convergence of civil society organizations in the continent called as the behest of the Africa Center for Energy Policy, ACEP. The event is already underway. Let's take you there.
Rich resource nations with large portions of their citizenry living in abject poverty. This simply ought not to be. And yet, for the majority of our countries, this is a norm by choice. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the fact that Africa is endowed with resources adequate to facilitate the socio-economic development of her people is so well known a fact. And yet, after several decades of exploitation of these resources, a number of very basic questions remain on our minds, questions that rightfully demand answers. And I'd like to take this opportunity to just ask three of them. One, are the current systems being used for the management of our natural resources effective and efficient? Are they working for us? And if they're not, are we prepared to take a look at other proven approaches that are working? Two, have the resources become a blessing or a curse? Is this a question that has been custom-made for our continent alone because we're so good at turning even blessings into curses? Three, are we mindful of the equity stake of future generations in these resources? How can we, with effective and efficient governance, responsibly account to all shareholders, including generations yet unborn? Ladies and gentlemen, these and many more questions convince me that the choice of theme for this year's summit, maximizing the benefits of petroleum resources in Africa, the role of open contracting for efficient negotiations and effective revenue utilization, is apt and timely, especially at a time when many African countries are considering new strategies towards answering the questions I have just asked. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the fact that effective contracting is critical for the maximization of benefit from our resources and for the proper establishment of commitments between governments and investors should not be up for debate. Yet, within the petroleum value chain, the uptake of open contracting has been a challenge for many African governments. The question is, why? There has, for example, been much discussion around oil revenue management, but we often forget that contracting is the bedrock of effective revenue generation and utilization. This would not be the first forum, and I'm sure not the last, where the need for effective contracting in general or specifically open contracting is being discussed. While in many discussions, we've all agreed that this is important, we need it, and we need it like yesterday, we have, as a continent, continued to drag our feet in its adoption and implementation. The question again remains, why? Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as on the various aspects of governance in the oil industry in Africa, determine and clearly articulate the real reason for Africa's slow progress in migrating to more successful governance systems, I know that you will share your experiences, your best practices, to assist with the speedy adoption of governance systems that support the growth and sustainability of Africa's petroleum industries. I believe that with the right commitment to action, because we have done a lot of talk about it, I'm hoping that this summit will be different, that we will commit to action. And with that, I can already see an Africa with countries all over that have put in place effective and efficient governance systems that provide the robust pathway required to develop and build strong societies with prosperous and sustainable tomorrows for future generations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to working with you, and I wish all of us a very successful summit. Thank you, and God bless our continent, Africa.
I believe you can do a loud applause for her. Thank you very much. Mrs. Harriet and Mr. Arthur. I would now like to invite the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Energy Policy, Mr. Benjamin Boakye, to give us a few remarks. A round of applause for him as well, Mr. Benjamin Boakye. And as he makes his way, I want to quickly recognize that we also have in our midst a very renowned judge who is representing the Chief Justice, Justice Jungs Duche. Thank you for coming, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evans. Madam Chair, Honorable Deputy Minister of Energy, distinguished representatives of governments across the region, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of Parliament, distinguished participants, friends from the media, our hard-working civil society organizations represented here, and all who have joined us virtually online, on social media, and through multimedia platform Joy FM and Multi TV. I would like to welcome you to the third Africa Oil Governance Summit 2017, and also to Ghana, Accra specifically. 2 years ago, ASAP instituted the Africa Oil Governance Summit to create a platform for African government conversation on Africa's oil and gas industry. This was in recognition of the fact that meetings like this were dominated by investment attraction and business opportunities in the sector, and less about governance to ensure that the oil resources serve as a catalyst for socio-economic development of our people. The summit also sought to deepen the consciousness that beyond our national borders as Africans, we have continental aspirations, which are consistent with our history with the Organization of African Unity, which later became the African Union. Madam Chair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the continent is blessed with significant oil resources. Between 2000 and 2010, the continent's oil reserves grew from 93 billion barrels to 132 billion barrels. In that same period, gas reserves increased from 441 trillion cubic feet to 520 trillion cubic feet. Subsequently, many oil and gas discoveries have been made, particularly in the frontier nations such as Kenya, Tanzania, Senegal, Uganda, and Mozambique. The trend suggests that Africa's oil potential could be far more than has been discovered. Ladies and gentlemen, with these increasing prospects, it is important for us to look at what we have done with what has already been pumped out of the ground. Our past may not be as important as the future, but it is important to acknowledge our collective failure to ensure that those resources contributed to the transformation of our continent. Rather, we have seen entrenchment of inequality resulting from corruption, environmental irrationality, among others, which have benefited a few at the expense of many. The active connivance of people entrusted with our collective resources with multinational corporations has seen billions of dollars stolen from the people and kept in secret jurisdictions. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent revelation of oil cash plundered from Africa in the leaked Paradise Papers only confirms what we have always known to be happening for several decades. I, however, hope that it will ignite a greater commitment on our part for transparency and accountability in the management of our oil resources. It even makes this year's theme of the summit more appropriate and timely. We need transparency in contracts now, more than ever. Open contracting empowers citizens and relevant stakeholders to track the contracting process, monitor implementation, and demand accountability. We are therefore keen to hear what the two-day discussions will recommend for an African ownership of the campaign for open contracting. Ladies and gentlemen, the continent has enjoyed support from its international partners to achieve significant levels of transparency on resource governance. Global standards such as the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, Open Contracting Partnership, European Union Directive on Extractive, and the Dodd-Frank Act have contributed to the fight for transparency, which we must be grateful for. However, the recent retreat of the United States on the Section 1504 of the Dodd-Frank Act and subsequent withdrawal from the EITI this year is enough signal that Africa must champion its own transparency cause and remain determined to decide who to do business with. We are happy to know that some US companies want to remain transparent and committed to information disclosure. We must encourage our governments to engage businesses that promote transparency and discourage them from engaging companies who lobby their government to retreat on it. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, feedback from the past two summits and further engagement with stakeholders have called for the need to broaden the scope of the summit to cover natural resource governance in general. I'm happy to announce that next year, we will transition the Africa Oil Governance Summit to Africa Resource Governance Summit, AREX. This is because, thank you. This has become even more important given the unique development trajectory the continent finds itself now. The world presents Africa with much bigger opportunities in the emerging global transition to renewable energy. Minerals such as cobalt, lithium, manganese, and nickel that are demanded for battery technologies, renewable energy, and other electronic devices are significantly present in Ghana and Africa. Many countries have deposits of these minerals which will be explored in the face of global demand. The Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, controls over 50% of the world's supply of cobalt. Africa either has the opportunity to transform these mineral resources and develop these technologies, and by so doing expand her economy, or continue the usual exportation of the raw minerals at the mercy of price volatility, risk of child labor at the mines, environmental pollution, etc. The risks associated with mining these poisonous minerals include the danger that pose to health and the presence of artisanal miners who do not have the requisite technologies to handle these minerals. Serious discussions about governance of these minerals is therefore non-negotiably important for Africa's sustained growth, development, and industrialization agenda. Madam Chair, between now and 2050, the global population growth will be influenced largely by Africa. Out of the 2.2 billion people to be added to the world population, Africa will contribute 1.3 billion. This increase in population threatens the African Union Agenda 2063, which seeks to place African countries among the best performers in global quality of life measures. We therefore must find the resources to ensure that we build capable human capital out of the numbers and not 1.3 million more poor people. Fortunately, Africa is blessed with natural resources that can facilitate the achievement of the African Union agenda. If the governance processes can improve to ensure that we have adequate legal and regulatory frameworks to create strategic linkages in resource development, efficient localization strategies, independent institutions, and investment in research and technology development, we can be confident that human development indicators will improve by 2063. The discussion about open contracting in resource exploitation is only a precursor to the changes we want to see in natural resource governance. I therefore encourage all participants to contribute their best to the discourse to bring the transformation we need in Africa. I am positive that this summit will lead to a practical solution that can be implemented and tracked at country levels. I will end by acknowledging the massive support provided by our partners to make this summit possible. To Ford Foundation, Ghana Oil and Gas for Inclusive Growth, GOGIG, the Natural Resource Governance Institute, NRGI, Oxfam, Strengthening Action Against Corruption, STAC, we say a big thank you to you. I would also like to say a final thank you to the Ministry of Energy for the collaboration they have provided ASAP ever since the idea of Africa Oil Governance Summit emerged. We hope that our relationship with our partners and the Ministry of Energy will be strengthened and sustained. I want to thank you and welcome to the Africa Oil Governance Summit.
Ben, thank you very much. We're now going to hear from our main speaker. And it's very interesting that I'm going to do this. And he knows why. The man who just finished talking last year by this time was quietly seated. But this year, of course, is giving us the welcome address. And shortly you understand why this is very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, the name I'm about to introduce is a very familiar one that we've all become accustomed to, especially if you operate within the oil and gas, natural resource, civil society space. I have for the last few years, and I've known him since he was in Tamale as a mayor. Now he is the Deputy Energy Minister. By the way, he used to be the boss of Benjamin Boakye at the Africa Center for Energy Policy. And also, by the way, also a founder of ASAP. He previously worked in other public and private organizations, an energy policy analyst, Ministry of Energy, Commissioner of Ghana's Public Utilities Regulatory Commission, a former Deputy Minister of State for the Northern Region, a former mayor of Tamale, as I indicated earlier, where I first met him. Globally, he's worked extensively on extractive industries and resource management. He currently serves on 2 international advisory boards, the Open Contracting Partnership, and you see why it's important to have him here. the Natural Resource and Community Review. He is a member of several global initiatives, including the thematic work on good governance of extractive and land resources under the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. In Africa, he has worked on petroleum policy, his resource governance projects in Liberia, Sierra Leone, you can mention. In fact, the part that fascinates me, that recently, he was a witness, he testified. Well, he hasn't been accused of anything, but he testified before the United States Congress, House of Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations on a very important subject when it comes to the resource curse. In Ghana, he was a member of the technical committee set up by the government of Ghana to review the Ghana Petroleum Revenue Management Act, something we will talk about in the course of the summit. He has also played advisory roles to a number of private sector operators in Ghana's, and of course, a co-chairman of the Frontier Energy Africa Limited. If I want to go on, I won't end. And he won't have this opportunity to present himself to us, not as a civil society person anymore, but as our Deputy Energy Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, with a standing ovation, round of applause, let's welcome Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. No, we won't sit. We will stand. Doug, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Evans. You were virtually reading my CV. First of all, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to convey the apology of my minister, Honorable Bachi Ajaku. He's unable to join us this morning because they are preparing the budget that we presented to Ghanaians on Wednesday. And as you know, the energy sector is a critical component of the economy of our country. And this is the main reason he's unable to join us this morning. And as Ivan said, for the past 2 successive years, I spoke from the position of the last speaker, Benjamin Boachi, as the then executive director of ASEP. What this tells me is that no condition is permanent. So Ben, it shouldn't be surprising that sometime you may be speaking from the other side, as I am doing today. But I'd like to assure you that although my role has changed, my philosophy and the values I espouse remain unchanged. And so, Madam Chair, my Lord, Justice Doche, Justice of the Supreme Court of Ghana, representing the Chief Justice, Honorable Ministers present, Honorable Members of Parliament, heads of institutions, civil society activists from Ghana and abroad. The list is long. And so as my Nigerian brothers will say, I would like to stand on all protocols already observed. It is a great privilege for me to open the 3rd Africa Oil Governance Summit here in Ghana. On 3 consecutive occasions, my ministry, as the executive director rightfully said, has committed to supporting this summit to allow for stakeholders on the continent to meet and discuss relevant governance issues and to promote a common program for the Africa Rising agenda. Ghana may not be old in the production of crude oil, but the progress made in the governance of our oil and gas resources since the discovery in 2007 shows our commitment to ensuring that our oil resources translate to socio-economic benefits for our people. We are also engaging our sister countries in the region for experience sharing, collective development of policy, and ultimately transforming our economies to be competitive in the global space. For this reason, the Ministry of Energy will remain committed to this event, even if you change it to the Africa Resource Governance Summit, so we can deepen the conversation about the governance of our natural resources. Ladies and gentlemen, the African continent is uniquely resourced by nature, but the contrast of widespread poverty, disease, and growing inequality, however, demands a rethink of how we have managed the resources so far. The continent must rise up to acknowledge that collectively we have failed to make the most of what we are blessed with. That challenge, I believe, must begin with those of us in leadership, particularly progressive leaders who are steering a renaissance of good governance in our continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the theme for this year's summit, maximizing the benefits of petroleum resources in Africa, the role of open contracting for efficient negotiations, revenue capture, and effective revenue utilization, explains the importance of contracting for the effective management of petroleum resources. Over the years, African countries have relied on international partners who own capital and technology to enable the exploitation of our resources. However, in many cases, ladies and gentlemen, the partnerships have been less than symbiotic between the state and the partners. The drivers for this situation is often attributed to corruption than the much talked about capacity of institutions. Therefore, the promulgation of laws such as the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the UK Bribery Act, Canada's Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act, the EU Accounting and Transparency Directives, and many others underscore efforts at exposing corruption and stopping the looting of resources meant for the development of our countries. Unfortunately, there appear to be more efforts at checking abuse of our resources in the states of origin of foreign international companies than those of resource host countries, particularly in Africa. Further, our institutions have been largely captured and often under-resourced, pursuing special interests in most cases and appropriating rent to a few in our society. This has led to devastating consequences for Africa's development. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to reverse this trend if we are to maximize benefits from our petroleum resources. The way to do this, among others, is to ensure that the processes of awarding contracts are transparent and credible and removes doubts on the minds of the ordinary citizens and relevant stakeholders. Madam Chair, in Ghana, our government has strengthened our commitment and determination to making the punishment for corruption punitive and deterrent, and to promote the independence and effectiveness of mechanisms for fighting corruption. In this respect, a bill is currently before Parliament for the establishment of Office of Special Prosecutor to deal with high-level corruption cases across sectors, including oil and gas. We've also subscribed as a country to international processes of addressing extractive-based corruption, such as the EITI and the Open Government Partnership, and the results so far have been quite impressive. Ladies and gentlemen, sovereign countries like Ghana have jurisdiction over their natural resources and are responsible for providing very open, transparent, and predictable legal regime for regulating petroleum activities to minimize uncertainty. The conditions under which governments grant rights to undertake petroleum activities are therefore very critical for the design of allocation policies and the choice of allocation system. Also, poorly conceived legal, regulatory, and fiscal frameworks may result in inefficiencies and loss of economic rent, which may not be mitigated through the allocation system. Undoubtedly, Madam Chair, the allocation of petroleum exploration and production rights to prospecting companies remains a very key component for the effective management of the finite carbon and hydrocarbon resources. The systems for allocating these resources can generally be grouped under two main types: the open door system and the bidding rounds. Each category has advantages and disadvantages in terms of transparency, economy, efficiency, and its impact on the benefits to the people of the country. Countries across Africa have various allocation mechanisms to achieve their desired specific goals. While some prefer rigid mechanisms with limited biddable or negotiable items, others award their blocks on the basis of the work program, with all financial elements fixed by legislation. In some jurisdictions, everything is negotiable. Madam Chair, we can arguably infer that there is no system for allocation that would be appropriate for all governments and under all circumstances. Optimal design of allocation policies will therefore depend on a range of factors and the country's specific objectives, which may change with time. Some of these objectives may be more effectively attained by combining different allocation systems or with other policy tools, in particular, the fiscal system and market regulation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to stress, however, that whilst countries may adopt different allocation systems, one important requirement that cannot be negotiated is the transparent process for allocating these rights. It cannot be stressed any further that credible investment attraction thrives in an open and transparent environment. When the processes of awarding contracts are well defined and dependably systematic, it reduces the risk to the investor, improves the attractiveness of the country, and prevents rent-seeking behavior. It also ensures that capable companies are the ones that get the blocks, not faceless politicians and well-connected individuals. Madam Chair, Ghana has made progress in our efforts to institutionalize open contracting. In 2016, the new Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, Act 919, was passed and provides for open and competitive public tender of oil blocks as well as direct negotiations. To this effect, government recently published a notice of commencement of direct negotiations with ExxonMobil in accordance with Section 910 of the Act 919. Our determination, ladies and gentlemen, to undertake an open and competitive bidding round in Ghana for the first time is, however, demonstrated by the development of draft regulations for this purpose and the broad consultations being held so far on those regulations. To prevent further delay in the application of public tender processes, we have decided to give attention to sections of the draft General Petroleum Regulations relating to competitive bidding and to lay those regulations in Parliament to pave way for Ghana to hold its first bidding round in 2018. These regulations will stipulate the exact procedure for licensing, pre-qualification criteria, and biddable factors in line with international best practices. Closely linked with this is the demarcation of Ghana's offshore sedimentary basins into grids. This process is also underway and is scheduled to be completed in time before the bidding rounds are announced. Madam Chair, open contracting also requires that contracts are made public and easily accessible. This realization has not been lost on our country, given the prominence of contract transparency in our law, particularly Section 56 of the Act 919. In furtherance of our desire to make open contracting an important feature of the governance of our petroleum resources, the Petroleum Commission has commenced the development of an online public register of contracts, and we are hopeful that this will be completed by the end of this year to allow for public access to petroleum contracts, permits, and other relevant information of public interest. The Ministry of Energy is also pursuing an aggressive exploration drive with the aim of replacing and increasing Ghana's oil and gas reserves. And as you know, we are producing from our depleting resources. And if we don't make more discoveries, we will not have an oil and gas industry in the near future. Madam Chair, to this end, I would like to announce that an environmental impact assessment has been conducted on the Voltaire Basin, the largest basin in Ghana, with a size of 103,600 square kilometers. A seismic contract has also been awarded by GNPC for work to commence on the basin. The necessary community engagements are also being conducted so we can resolve all relevant issues and to educate communities on the potential impact of oil and gas development. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, maximizing the benefits of our petroleum resources also requires that the revenue generated from these resources are equitably and efficiently distributed. The government of Ghana, as most of you know, introduced a revenue management law some years ago. This law recognizes the need to balance equity with efficiency. The law also demands greater transparency for the utilization of oil revenues. In consonance with our promise to the Ghanaian people, the government of His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo this year committed significant portion of our oil revenue to the pro-poor sectors of education, agriculture, and health. This has largely been influenced by many of you sitting here, particularly the Africa Center for Energy Policy, which has been campaigning for some years now for the use of Ghana's oil revenue in financing education and agriculture. The President of our Republic is committed to the full implementation of the free secondary education program, which he launched in September this year. What is significant about this is the use of our oil revenue to finance this noble social intervention. For instance, in 2017, this year, an amount of 211 million Ghana cedis from the annual budget funding amount of our oil revenue was allocated for the implementation of this program, constituting 53% of the financing requirement of the program. This, in our view, ensures the most equitable manner of distributing our oil wealth, the best way to maximize benefits from our oil, and will also provide a convenient foundation for the development of our human resource base, whose development impact we believe would outlive our oil wealth. It further provides the largest social development program in our country, as it will ensure that no child is denied education up to the secondary level because of lack of money. Government will continue to commit more oil revenue to education because we believe that is right. And we will continue to address the problems associated with the implementation of the free senior high school program. Madam Chair, closely related to human resource development is the more critical need of empowering our people with the relevant technical know-how to effectively participate in the oil and gas industry and maximize benefits for our country. Last week, ladies and gentlemen, the government launched the Accelerated Oil and Gas Capacity Program, AOGC program for short, another campaign promised by our president, to drive our agenda of ensuring that Ghanaians play front roles and take control of the oil and gas development of our country. The program has become necessary because our universities continue to train geologists, petroleum engineers, and other related graduates. However, we have not been able to train technicians and adequate numbers of middle-level personnel who are in high demand by the oil and gas industry. For example, I am told that the development of the Hess discovery and others will require some 500 international accredited welders. But as a country, we have not equipped our people for this great opportunity. The AOGC program, which involves 7 institutions in Ghana, including the Takoradi Technical Institute, the Kikam Technical Institute, and the Ghana Maritime University, and which have been well equipped under a facility from the World Bank, will ensure that we train first-class welders and other categories of technicians to serve the needs of the oil and gas industry. Madam Chair, the Ministry of Energy has already laid out a plan under this program that will ensure that about 1,000 Ghanaians are trained every year in various technical skills. 200 small and medium enterprises provided with the capacity to gain a competitive advantage in the industry, and about 300 employees in public institutions will also be equipped to support the development of petroleum policies and the enforcement of industry regulations. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I would like at this point to thank the organizers of this very important summit, the Africa Center for Energy Policy, and its partners for a great job done in putting this meeting together. Let us continue to share ideas on how to effectively manage our resources for the benefit of our people. We are certainly better together as a continent. I look forward to the outcome of this summit and promise you that I will share recommendations from this summit with ministers of petroleum on our continent to give real meaning to your intentions and plans for Africa's development. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have a singular honor and pleasure to declare this summit, the 3rd Africa Oil Governance Summit 2007, officially opened. Thank you, and may God bless our country, Ghana. Thank you very much.
Oh, come on, a bigger round of applause. A bigger round of applause for Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. First appearance at the summit as a substantive minister. You know, politics is such a transient job. And we just hope that next year you still be where you are. If you are where you are next year, we'll have him again. But a number of points that he's put out today that are absolutely interesting, groundbreaking stuff. 1,000 Ghanaians will be trained every year in various technical fields. And I'm pretty sure ASAP we'll be tracking that. We'll be discussing that as we move on to our next session. But a great thank you again. And we are live again on Joy 99.7 FM. We're also live on the Joy News Channel on Multi TV. Now that the program has formally been launched, we want to go straight into discussing some of the key issues. And some of the things that the Honorable Deputy Minister just talked about will be a subject to some analysis and discussion in this next session. And the topic is an interesting one, the state of open contracting in Africa, examining the challenges, opportunities, and implications of open governance in resource contracts. I want to invite Mrs. Harriet and Mr. Arthur, who is a chairperson for today, and she will be facilitating this next session for us. And she will take her seat at the extreme, and I invite the rest of the panel members to join. A round of applause for her as she makes her way to take her seat. And as you know already, she is executive partner at Arthur Energy Advisors. Joining her to discuss that topic is Mr. Johnson Awoyomi, who is a senior technical assistant to the Minister of State, Petroleum, Nigeria. Thank you, sir, for your time. And please, a round of applause for the big man from Nigeria. He is the senior technical assistant to the Petroleum Minister in Nigeria. Also joining our panel is Daniel Bondo, who is the Minerals Policy Advisor, Ministry of Mines and Mineral Resources in Sierra Leone. Is also with us today. And a round of applause for him as well as he makes his way to join us. Is Daniel with us? Okay. We will invite Tabila Mazoma, who is the Ministry of Mines and Minerals Development in Zambia, if she's here to also join us. Join a panel? Yes. A major round of applause for him. And ladies and gentlemen, these are your panel members, and I will hand over. Oh, okay, I see. And the Deputy Energy Minister will take the place of his boss, Honorable Boache Jako. A round of applause for him again as he takes his seat. That's Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam in this session. As we interrogate a bit more of the things he said, I'm going to hand over to Madam Harriet and Mr. Arthur to take over. And we're running from now to 12 before we take our break. Thank you very much, Madam. Your panel.
Thank you very much, Evans. And panel members, you're welcome. I'm just quickly, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, going to go over some very significant portions of their CVs so that you recognize that you have a very competent panel to discuss the topic that they have been given. I think the Honorable Minister has just been introduced. So with your permission, sir, I'm going to skip you and go quickly to introduce our friend from Nigeria. So Engineer Johnson Awoyomi is a senior technical assistant to the Minister of State for Petroleum in Nigeria. Mr. Awoyomi has over 25 years of experience working in the petroleum sector in Nigeria. Most of the time he spent in the sector has been spent working with the NNPC, Nigeria's GNPC equivalent, so the Nigerian National Petroleum Company. Thank you. In his role, some of the things he's done has mainly been institutionalizing project management, cost engineering and project controls at the corporate and business levels across the NNPC. Prior to his becoming the assistant, prior to becoming the assistant to the minister, he was the general manager in charge of, also in the NNPC, sorry. Engineer Awoyomi had championed several coaching and mentoring initiatives for the young technical staff of the NNPC. In addition, he had been in the lead in developing strategy for the NNPC. Some of the initiatives he's been involved in that have direct bearing on what the discussions we are having today are on change navigation in the NNPC. And it was a multi-year effort to transform Nigeria's National Petroleum Corporation. The second one was a culture change management initiative that took measurements at implementing initiatives that to entrench company value, shared values across the company. Engineer Awoyomi holds a BSc in chemical engineering from the Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria, and also has a lot of international certifications. With a round of applause, I would ask you to please welcome Engineer Awoyomi. Our third panelist, Mr. Tabila. You have to help me mentioning you. Majamo. Is that correct? Okay. So Mr. Majamo comes from Nigeria. He works with the Ministry of Mines and Minerals Development. In Zambia. Comes from Zambia. The Ministry of Mines and Minerals Development has worked with this in this sector for over 15 years. He's been involved in the Mineral Value Chain Monitoring Project, and this is a project that has been aimed at providing an informed and transparent platform for optimal collection of taxes and other fiscal revenues for Zambia's extractive industry. Some of his duties have included processing and issuance of exploration and mineral rights. In fact, Mr. Tabila is at the right place today. He is responsible for the management of the Ministry of Energy's online license portals, which have been developed with the aim of promoting transparency in the industry. He's currently coordinating the exercise of digitizing oil blocks on Zambia's online portal to provide an up-to-date information on all exploration activities in the country. He is a team member of Zambia's Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. His expertise is in regulation and administration of extractive industries. Mr. Tabila Majamo, you're welcome to the summit. Now, distinguished ladies and, distinguished gentlemen, so you're welcome to the panel that's supposed to examine the state of open contracting in the petroleum industry in Africa. And I think that the Honorable Minister has done a great job of telling us what is happening in Ghana, but as well with his experience all around the world, he's given us quite a bit of information on what's going on. But I think we're back home looking at what's happening in your respective countries. You are the countries representing the continent today at this Africa Governance Summit. And we want to look at, even though listening to the Honorable Minister, I was just almost going to leave this place very satisfied that indeed Ghana has done everything it takes to make this transparent. But I think that what we would like to hear from you is that if we're doing so much, why does it still feel that our petroleum industry is closed? That a lot of the things that we're doing are not transparent and does not work towards giving us maximum benefits from our natural resources. So I am going to start with you, Honorable Minister, for two reasons. One, because you are the host minister for this summit, but also because you just ended it. I want you to bring it home. If we are doing so much in Ghana, why does it still feel closed? Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. And I'm not surprised. You've always thrown hard questions at me. Well, I think that we have a great opportunity as a country to do more than we have done in the past as far as contract transparency is concerned. We all, those of us who have been monitoring developments on the oil and gas front know that Ghana has used what we call an open door policy in engaging international partners until the Act 919 was passed. That opened the door for us to transition from the open door policy to a more competitive, a more transparent policy. But we haven't started the application of the law because the law provides that this policy will be implemented as prescribed. And the lawyers have made me to understand when they use as prescribed, it means that you have to develop regulations that will give meaning to this broad provision in the law. And so what we have been doing for the past 6 months has been to develop relevant regulations, hold stakeholder consultations around these regulations. And we have just realized, only last week, that if we are to apply open and competitive bidding, it may be delayed because the general petroleum regulations, of which the competitive bidding regulations are part, will not be ready soon. And so we've decided rather to pull out the sections that deal with open and competitive bidding so we can put that before Parliament and have our regulations ready to commence bidding rounds next year. So on the contracting side, yes, we haven't done well in practical terms. But very soon, once the regulations are in place, because we have a number of companies who are knocking our door, but we have decided not to go ahead until we develop these regulations. What we are doing with Exxon, which is also consistent with the law, is negotiation that had ongoing before we came into government. An MOU was signed, which commits us. We would have preferred to take it through competitive bidding. But in spite of that, we are very committed to use competitive bidding as the default process. It is only in critical circumstances that we may rely on direct negotiation to engage our companies. The other side of open contracting, which Ghana is doing well, is on the revenue side. Because open contracting does not end where you have an open process for allocating rights. It doesn't end there. It must go through the value chain to revenue collection. Indeed, if open contracting is aimed at bringing value for money for our countries, the level where you can assess the true value for money of your contracts is where you are collecting your revenue. If you cannot do proper auditing, cost auditing, if you cannot do proper tax assessment, you may have an open process in allocating your rights, but you will not derive the value which open contracting is supposed to achieve. In that area, we are doing relatively well. Our tax institutions are doing so well. Then beyond that, the transparency around how much Ghana is earning is quite significant. Every quarter, the minister publishes how much we have collected. He publishes the price at which we sold our oil. He publishes the destinations where the oil revenue have been allocated. We can do more because when it comes to procurement for the projects that are funded by the oil money, again, we are found wanting. So as far as Ghana is concerned, our development is quite mixed. We are doing well somewhere, we are not doing well in other places. And so this is why I said that we can do better. And I believe that occasions like this should help us to know where we are not doing well so we can improve upon it for the Ghanaian citizen to see what open contracting is all about.
Thank you very much. I think indeed this forum, I believe, is going to provide you the incentive to do better. Because one of the things we are asking the distinguished ladies and gentlemen to do is to hold you to the commitments you make to us at the summit. In fact, Ben has assured me that the summit is not ending tomorrow and that he's coming right as everybody who makes a commitment to move towards making sure that our nations get their maximum from the resources that have been endowed them. So thank you very much. I'm going to quickly come back to you, but I want to establish what's happening in Zambia and Nigeria quickly. Then we'll talk about what the opportunities and the challenges are. So, Mr. Tabila, can I come to you, Mr. Moshan Musori, and sorry, thank you. So can I just ask you, what is happening in Zambia as far as open contracting is concerned?
Thank you. I'd like to express my gratitude for inviting us, Zambia, to come and participate at this conference, and so that also we can share basically the achievements made regarding transparency, and also regarding the way we have reformed our licensing process to be inclusive in terms of our citizens participating in the process. I'll start with where we're coming from. We have come from a stage where we are more like on the, I can say, a manual system kind of processing of licenses from somewhere 2005. And then after that, we implemented automated processes of licensing, which also triggered the amendments of various legislation to support the automation of the processes. Thereafter, what also came up was the review of the licensing process, such that we make it more like open and simple for every ordinary citizen to understand in terms of the requirements on how to apply for a license. So with that, basically it has increased confidence in the mining sector, or I can say extractive sector, where I've seen like an ordinary citizen being able to understand the various stages that are involved in acquiring a license, and even those who want to participate in terms of applicants, investors, they're able to also understand the processes and the benefits of why we have opened up, such that certain sectors, product sectors such as environment, are taken care of in the process, especially at local level, to ward level, even at district level, where we have seen a situation whereby the citizens or the communities are involved in negotiating and in the implementation of environmental projects brief. So the benefits basically are such that it has increased confidence in the licensing process, and we hope to learn more from this forum of how various countries have achieved their strategies regarding the extractive sector. So we appreciate the fact that having a simplified process with well-defined processes, it triggers a good and efficient processing system. Hence, that also triggers confidence in terms of the citizens themselves appreciating how the allocation of resources is implemented. So on our side, we have seen the benefits as Zambia regarding the opening up of processes. And per se, we don't choose like contracts. We have just come up with very simplified, well-defined steps on how you can acquire a mining right. And that, to us, it has helped us to administer the sector. And in this way, we feel going that route will basically increase confidence on the part of the citizens and basically the sector itself for ease administration. So for us, I think the
So watching Joy News on Multi TV, I'm Daniel Daze. That was the opening ceremony and the beginning of the panel discussion of the Africa Oil Governance Conference, which is currently ongoing at the Labadi Beach Hotel. Interesting points that came up there.